finish off our morning, we're going to take a look at Space to Village managing climate risk around the world. We are very grateful to AGS Councilor Ms. Carrie Stokes, the Chief Geographer of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, and Mr. Daniel Irwin, the SERVIR Global Program Manager at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, for putting together this special presentation. Carrie and Dan?
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to talk with you about SERVIR. It's a long-standing flagship program between NASA and USAID, and I think our agencies are probably the two most different yet complementary organizations in our federal government. At NASA, we look into space, we travel into space, and we use the unique vantage point of space to look back on our home planet. And USAID works in over 100 countries around the world, and it's really great to be back on stage with Carrie Stokes. We started the program together some 18 years ago, so I feel like it's, and we haven't presented together in many years, so I feel like we're getting the band back together. So at NASA, most people, when they think of NASA, you think of rovers on Mars or going to the moon, or of course we're going back to the moon. But when NASA was founded in 1958, one of its original goals was to study the Earth from space and use that information for scientific understanding. And this has been accomplished through a constellation, as you all know better than most communities, a constellation of Earth-observing satellites taking pioneering observations of our home planet, looking at the oceans and the atmosphere and the solid Earth. And of course, the mission has evolved quite a bit since 1958. The whole idea back then was just this notion of scientific understanding, but today we've really morphed into this concept of Earth action and using that information for actionable decisions. So SERVIR is an example of this, and really excited to tell you more about it. But let me hand the microphone over to Carrie Stokes to talk about USAID.
Thanks, Dan. Could I get a show of hands from anyone who has heard of USAID? Oh, this makes me feel so good. Okay, great. The U.S. Agency for International Development, which is where I am based as the Chief Geographer and the Director of our GeoCenter. So many people in the U.S. are not familiar with USAID because we work internationally. So this is just a quick primer on who we are and what we do. We are the lead for international development for the US government. And as Dan mentioned, we work in about 100 countries around the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. What you're seeing here is a few photographs to give you a sense of the many sectors in which we work. Environment sector, of course, which we're talking about these 2 days, climate change and climate risks and hazards. We work in health. We work in education. We work to help stabilize countries in conflict and help prevent conflict and recover from it. We have multiple sectors. We're now in the digital era, and we're now focusing on digital development and how we can do our business taking advantage of today's 21st century tools. We got our start in about 62 years ago, around the same time that NASA did. So we've learned some things, and we're evolving. What we're probably best known for, though, is our humanitarian assistance work. We had a nice conversation yesterday about humanitarian assistance with the lead for FEMA, as well as for NGA. USAID will respond to disasters most anywhere in the world outside of the United States. But of course, we collaborate as well with our colleagues inside the United States. So this is how we're most known. But what's really important at USAID is we transition from the response to a disaster to the longer term development from that point. Ultimately, we are working to reduce poverty around the world, to strengthen the democratic governance process, which is critical to the entire picture of helping countries advance out of poverty. We're working, of course, to save lives. and to help people progress beyond the need for assistance in the first place. So while we lead on international development, I do want to take this moment during Geography Awareness Week to also share that we are using geospatial tools at USAID also. On International GIS Day, just on Wednesday, 2 days ago, USAID launched our first ever geospatial strategy. So we're pretty excited about that. That's not what we're known for. We're not a mapping agency, but we recognize that to better target where we need to place our programs, to understand where the need is the greatest, we really have to use all the tools in the toolbox, and that includes geospatial technologies. All right, what I'm actually here to talk about today, though, is this long-term partnership that Dan mentioned between our nation's space agency and our nation's development agency. So NASA, which is very well known in this country and beyond our own borders, is highly regarded for its science, technology, and data. At USAID, we have need for the end users to better understand how to get access to that information, how to consume it in a way that is in a format that makes sense, and ensuring that it's timely. So this is really what we're here to talk about today, our partnership that has led to this 18-year-long program that we hope continues well into the future to bridge the gap between the development of tools and data sets and technologies and ensure we're connecting with the people who can really use it to make the most informed decisions at whatever scale they're making those decisions. So we have multiple challenges in the world right now. Our focus of these 2 days is to talk about the risks and the hazards related to climate and weather, of course. The pace of change is accelerating. And in the world that I work in outside of this country, what we continually find is that it's marginalized people who are most affected by changes that they really weren't involved in creating. And we recognize that to really come up with solutions and improve the resilience of the communities where USAID works, we have to be able to understand using Earth observations and satellite data, not only to assess what's going on, but to help devise ways to improve our resilience and adapt. I'd like to point out that we have somebody here in the room, our very own Catherine Nakalembe, who is one of the applied science researchers with the program that we're talking about today. Hopefully she's here in the room, but we're so proud of the work that she's been doing for many years in this program. So the program is called SERVIR. For those of you who either speak Spanish or French, you will know what the term SERVIR means. It's a verb that means to serve. It actually derives from an acronym when we first started the program years ago, and the name has stuck even in places in the world that don't speak French or Spanish. But this long-term initiative between our two agencies is really addressing the climate risks around the world. And we like to think of this as connecting space to village. So we have categorized the work that we're doing into these 5 buckets. We're focusing on agriculture and food security, water security, ecosystem management and carbon management, weather and climate resilience, of course, which is the theme of our 2 days, and air quality and health. Before I even tell you about the regions in the world where we're working, you can probably begin to think about some of the challenges around the world and which buckets we might be focusing on in which places. But I wanted to start with a map of the United States, which is where we are right now. This program, SERVIR, connects U.S. science to global challenges. And we have many research institutions and universities with whom we have partnered over the years that span 21 states in this country. So it's not just a program focused on doing science in the developing world. This is truly a global partnership around the world. And now let's kind of zoom in a little bit and see where we're actually working. Okay, you'll see in the United States, since that's where you just were, you'll see 2 points. One is focused on Washington, D.C., which is where the headquarters for USAID is, and that's where I am based. The other is focused on Huntsville, Alabama, in case you didn't know. That's where the Severe Science Coordination Office is based, where Dan works. Fun little fact, when we first met each other and didn't know we were going to kick off this long-term program, we realized he's from the DC area, I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. So it's fun to kind of keep the dream alive between Alabama, the place where I grew up in Rocket City, USA, and of course the place where Dan grew up, where we have so many government agencies focusing on multiple challenges, both this country and abroad. We're working in Latin America, Africa, and Asia with the SERVIR program. In Latin America, we have a program focused on the Amazon called SERVIR Amazonia, and one could imagine we're focused on monitoring and protecting the Amazon. Moving over to Africa, we have a SERVIR hub that focuses on issues in West Africa, and we've had a long-term presence in East and Southern Africa as well. Then continuing on to Asia, we can't forget that the water tower of Asia starts in the Himalayan mountains. So we've had a long-term presence now in the Himalayas, as well as in Southeast Asia, where the water flows downhill. So these hubs not only focus on science and data and technological applications for issues that are important for their own region, but the network that has been created between the scientists and the implementers across has become part of the great value and the learning that we share in this network of implementers. So, how do we do it? It's not just NASA and USAID. We do this through our partnerships and our collaborators. We're at the hub in the middle. We have our next layer, of course, where we coordinate with those who are truly doing the implementation in their own regions. But the collaborators go well beyond that. It's private sector, it's US government agencies, it's international organizations, and of course, our universities and our research centers. On the end user side, we have governments from the countries where we're working in this program. We have end users who are non-governmental organizations. And of course, the private sector in the countries where the program is implemented. And the most important here is communities, households, and individuals. We're now at a point in the evolution of access to satellite information that allows an individual to be able to get information, not just the image, but an actual analysis that can help them make a more informed decision. So what we've learned over the years, and we're still learning, we haven't figured it all out, but we've learned to ensure that the program sustains and has the impact we expect. It must be locally led. We have to work with local people to best understand what their needs are, and then translate that into science and data applications that meet those needs, not the other way around. It's gotta be collaborative. It can't be scientists from the US coming, designing a solution, throwing it over the fence, walking away and say, okay, we fixed the problem. It doesn't quite work like that. It must be inclusive. It has to include all the members of the community that will be affected. Not every app has to be involving every member of a community, but those that are going to be affecting people's lives, they need to be part of the solution. And it has to be built to last. It can't just be a one-off app. This is what we've learned. And it sounds easy to say that, I can tell you that now, but it's harder to plan that and embed that in the program from the beginning. But our approach has recognized that to truly succeed, we have to co-develop with our partners. We deliberately involve women and men and indigenous leadership. We only design apps that we know are going to relate to a certain decision that needs to get made and that can lead to an action. And then this is critical also from the USAID side. We have to measure our impact. It's not enough to design an app to involve the people involved on the ground and hope that it works. We really have to actually monitor and evaluate how it's working and whether we need to improve or course correct. So this is at the core of our philosophy, and as I said, we've learned a lot of things along the way. It's been a fascinating journey. It's not over yet, but in addition to being able to ensure that we're speaking similar language, as you can imagine with so many countries, we've got more than 45 countries around the world, different cultures, different languages. Even between NASA and USAID, the word mission has two very different meanings. Our field offices at USAID are called USAID missions. But a mission to NASA means something very different. It could be a mission to the moon, mission to Mars, or beyond. So with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Dan, who's going to take you on a little trip around the world to give you a few stories and examples, just a teaser of the many different ways that we're using satellite data, Earth observations, and geospatial technology to improve people's lives.
Thank you so much. So in SERVIR, we have over 70 services, and I'm just going to show a few of them. We don't have time for all 70. And as Carrie said, kind of take you around the world. And I want to point out, and Carrie talked a lot about university partnerships, and it's so crucial. I mean, we for example, here in the room, Arizona State University, Columbia University, University of Maryland, and others. So that's crucial to the work that we do. And I want to point out to this community that through NASA, we do have grants that go out. We have a grant system through what we call ROSES that comes out. Nice name, ROSES, on February 14 of every year, and sometimes SERVIR is in that. So keep your eyes peeled for that, for SERVIR solicitations, if you're interested. That's just my plug to get some of the great research I've seen here in the past few days into the system. So starting in South America, our SERVIR hub is partnering with David Salisbury from the University of Richmond, working with indigenous peoples in the upper Amazon, using satellite data so communities can see their territories through the lens of climate change. Things like evapotranspiration, deforestation, forest degradation, which is helping the communities better articulate the things that they already know that's going on, like drying, but in new ways that they haven't been able to do before. And the communities are able to really see that on a map and have more meaningful conversations with governments and NGOs. And we often, and Carrie mentioned it, we often talk about connecting space to village, but this is really a village to space approach. And so as a result, for example, the government in Ucayali, Peru, is talking about, because of these conversations about having and creating a regional reserve. And the imagery, the satellite imagery, and what we call these geo-dashboards are really enabling these conservations. It's helping local people scale up these conversations. And in fact, literally right now as we speak, some of the indigenous leaders, for example, Maria Elena in the previous picture who is wearing the red, she is at NASA headquarters. She, I think, just went to USAID headquarters about an hour ago, and she's at NASA headquarters right now, talking with some of the senior leadership on how they can continue to grow and scale up some of these activities. In West Africa, with climate change, pastoralists are having a harder time finding water for their and forage for their livestock. And with changing weather patterns under a changing climate, the ponds that they've consistently relied on have changed and many have dried up. And therefore, in the Furlough region in Senegal, we've created a service called Wendu that's using high temporal satellite data to determine which ponds have water and even to determine how much water is in those ponds. And you can see this in the image for a single pond, but we're actually monitoring thousands of these ponds in Senegal, and we actually hope to scale this service up to the broader Sahel. And we're working with groups like Veterinarians Without Borders and local radio broadcasters to share this information with extensionists and pastoralists to guide where the best places to find water and forage and when. And a shout out to Dan Osgood. He talked about this yesterday. He literally just got off the plane yesterday morning. He took the red eye back, but he's been talking with some of these, with the pastoralists and with the radio broadcasters, and also looking at how to bring in gamification to improve the decision-making process. Moving to East Africa, the farmers there regularly face droughts. We've seen that in some of the other presentations, but they're seldom covered by insurance. So about 6 years ago, the government of Kenya created a pilot agricultural insurance program for one county to help the farmers in the event of crop failure, but their methods were really, really expensive. So working again, a shout out to Catherine back there, using satellite data for, and creating these crop masks, SERVIR, she was working very closely with our hub there, helped the government of Kenya reduce the cost of data collection by some 70%, and then the government of Kenya was able to scale this up to the broader parts of the country and make this effectively a nationwide insurance program that went from some 900 people insured about 5 years ago to about 1.4 million now, and the system has resulted in about $3 million of payouts to about 37,000 farmers. In South Asia, under a changing climate, Bangladesh, which, as you all already know, is one of the most vulnerable countries to disasters, is seeing more severe storms. And they even had a rare tornado not so long ago. So with the government of Bangladesh, we created what we call, it's a flagship service called HIWAT, the High Impact Weather Assessment Toolkit, which provides 60-hour ensemble forecasts for hail, lightning, and extreme rainfall, providing actionable warnings. So it's now it's installed and running on a system, a high computational system in the Bangladesh Met Department that the World Bank provided. And then it's being used downstream. So we see that the Flood Forecast and Warning Center in Bangladesh is creating alerts from this. And the Bangladesh Department of Agriculture Extension, whose mandate is to get the information out to farmers, is sending the information out to about 30 million farmers regularly, because Bangladesh has the largest number of lightning fatalities in the world, and that hits farmers the hardest. So the idea is, if you can see on the left, you have the forecast, and then you have the alerts, and then through a World Bank system called BAMIS, there's this distribution system that, it's farmer groups, it's kiosks, there's a BAMIS portal, an app, SMS, ag extensionists, trainings, and mass media, TV, radio, et cetera. So we have a whole sort of constellation working with the BAMIS system through the Department of Agriculture Extension to be able to get that information out to the 30 million farmers in Bangladesh. And finally, in Southeast Asia, air pollution it causes over 2 million deaths annually in South and Southeast Asia. So as you can imagine, there was a really strong demand for air quality information, especially in Thailand, where they've really suffered from worsening air quality conditions over the past several years. So using satellite data, using ground data, and working with the government of Thailand, the Pollution Control Department, the Ministry of Environment, we developed a tool called the Air Quality Explorer. And what this does is it looks at current PM 2.5 and then makes a 3-day forecast out. But what's really exciting are the downstream applications again of this. So we've also created an app called Burn Check, because one of the biggest challenges is, you have slash and burn agriculture, and a lot of the air pollution comes from that. And in the past, the government would say, I think there's going to be bad air quality, so we're going to create a burn ban for the next 2 weeks or 30 days even. And as a result of this system, now a farmer can actually put in a request and say, I'd like to burn this area, and it goes through a decision support system. The government of Thailand then comes back and says yes or no, but what it's done is it's put the burn bans in effectively to a couple days, providing the farmers that better intelligence and opportunity to work, and ultimately it creates better air quality in Thailand, and the system is now being expanded to both Cambodia and to Laos. And just real quick, what's important about having this global network is it enables scaling and replicating across the different hubs. So, for example, stream flow prediction, it was created in Nepal. It's being used around the world. And I'll show you on the next slide. For example, the stream flow forecasting is being used in Ecuador by a community to create an agricultural irrigation system. It's being used in Nepal for flood warning, and it's being used in Malawi for a community-based flood early warning system that the government of Malawi said that it saved them $40 million last year during the cyclone that they had. So it's really exciting that the SERVIR network, as Carrie was talking about, the different hubs partner with each other, and because of open data and open science, they share the code, they have the relationships, and they're able to really transfer the different services across the entire network. So with that said, let me hand it back to Carrie to wrap it up and talk about what we've learned over the past several years.
So this is a theme I was speaking to earlier. Obviously, to have a long-term impact, we have to have a sustained long-term commitment and investment in these places with communities, and the relationships are critical. Co-development, we have to design the solutions together. It's gotta be demand-driven. We can say that, it's alliterative, easy to say, harder to do, harder to understand what exactly are the needs, but that's this connection that we have now with people locally to connect with space, to village. And in saying the word village, I'm not demeaning those who don't live in a village. It could be they live in a major city, but can still benefit from these applications. The open science that Dan just mentioned, we can design code and tools, but our whole purpose here is to ensure that everyone who can access that and build upon it has that access. So the sharing is part of our philosophy. Critical to have the good communication. And I just bring this up because even between two government agencies from the same culture, in the same country, had to learn how to have a common vocabulary about what we were talking about. So we can't overlook that the communication component is built in from the beginning and addressed throughout if we realize we're not necessarily on the same page, so to speak. Interdisciplinary teams and interdisciplinary thinking. I don't need to tell this group, because we're geographers, we think spatially already. We already have an approach that's sort of a systems-based way of looking at the world, understanding that interdisciplinary is the only way we're going to be able to solve the great challenges that we're faced with at this time in human civilization. So that's how we've designed the process with this program, SERVIR. That we, as you know, have said, is connecting space to village, but it's so much more than that. We're connecting data, we're connecting technology, we're connecting insights, but most importantly, we are connecting people. So, with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you for your attention.